Welcome, everyone. We can go ahead and get started. We have some kind of background things that we want to cover while people are trickling in. We have a lot to cover, and we also want to make sure that we get to people's questions. So we can come back on camera for the panelists. We can say hello. All right. Okay. All right, somebody asked me if we could. I didn't know that the chat was disabled, so thank you for letting me know. And for the next webinar, we'll make sure that folks are able to chat. That was not intentional. So, but if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we will get to them as soon as we can. So thanks everyone for joining us. We are excited for this first kickoff webinar for this climate action planning webinar series. This first one is focused on how to choose the best path to embark on your climate action planning journey. And I'll introduce our panelists here in a minute, but in the meantime, my name is Cami Sacco. I am with Second Nature and have been with Second Nature for a little bit over 2 years, and will be kind of the person that's leading the series overall. So if you have any suggestions, please, you're welcome to email me if you are interested in anything specifically. So Jen, can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so just an FYI, this program is being recorded, and we will have it uploaded to YouTube and send it out to folks that may have missed the presentation today. And then if you have questions, we have set aside, I think, approximately 15 minutes for that, but please add them at any time. We'd love to have some that are ready to go once we finish the presentations. And during the session, everybody is on mute except the panelists. And next slide. And so as I mentioned, this is the first of 12 webinars focused on completing a climate action plan. If you're interested in what the full 12 webinars are, that's on our website, on our events and webinars website directly. So you're welcome to go and look at that. And we are releasing them in different parts. So this is the kind of first part of the series, and then we'll have 3 more that are coming out within the next couple months. Next slide. As some of you might know, and some of you may not, we have our Higher Education Climate Leadership Summit coming up in February of next year, which is in Washington, D.C. And if you are interested, registration is open. We also have the request for proposals open. That one is open until September 27th. And then registration is open through December and early January, I believe. Next slide. We also have, I'm going to tell you all a little bit about some of the working groups that exist. And if you're interested in joining, we have a QR code. This first one is led by my colleague Blythe, the Intersectional Climate Action Leaders Working Group. This is meant to be a BIPOC affinity space for members and non-members of the Climate Leadership Network. And it's intended for HBCU, MSIs, and tribal college, climate action stakeholders, community, NGO, and corporate partners. And if you're interested in this, there's this QR code, or you can email Blythe directly with her email down below. Next slide. And then we also have a new a new community of practice, which is focused on the IRA. So if you're interested in joining this, please scan this QR code. It hasn't been launched yet, but we, I think, are planning on launching that within the next, I want to say month. So if you're interested or have any questions, go ahead and scan that, or you're welcome to directly ask me in the chat, or we can email, and I'll drop my email at the end of the webinar. Next slide. All right, so before we kind of jump off, we wanted to get a little bit of an idea of who folks are in the room. And so I'm going to launch a poll and we will have it open for just a couple minutes to get an idea of just where you all are at personally or where your institution is at around climate action planning. And so we're going to go ahead and launch it and we'll keep it open for a couple minutes and then we'll introduce the panelists for today's webinar. Okay, it looks like we have most of the folks. Maybe we'll keep it open for about 20 more seconds. Have about 75% of y'all that have responded. But this is really helpful to know we have a mixed bag, which is great. Not, I don't want to end it when somebody's in the middle of completing it. So I'll wait maybe 10 more seconds because folks might be finishing up a question. Okay, so I'm just gonna let everybody see this so we kind of know where we're at. So we have quite a bit of folks that are almost even, that you haven't started, just starting in the middle. Nobody is finishing up. Some of y'all are currently updating, which I will note that is our last webinar of this series, is how to update your climate action plan, but that will be in January. So just an FYI on that. So 29% said yes, they have a climate action plan. 54 do not. Glad you're here. Currently updating at 12%, and then some folks don't know. And then about half and half that people have participated in the process. So this is really great information. So thanks everybody for filling that out. And I think that's going to help our panelists kind of understand who they're talking to. So next slide, please. All right, so I first just want to call out Jen for graciously helping me because I recently got a new computer last week and didn't realize that my Zoom settings did not allow me to share my screen. So I just learned that. So Jen is helping me move slides forward when that should be predominantly my role. So thank you, Jen. But today we have Ira Babtiwale, Jen Hawk, and Matt Williams as our panelists, and I'm going to do their introductions as we move through their presentations. And so we're going to start with Ira. And so if you want to go to the next slide, Ira was, actually go back. Sorry, Jen. So just a little info about Ira. She is the director of Mount San Antonio Community College. She's on a mission to decrease the college's carbon footprint, which with a larger goal of getting zero to net zero by 2050 through the implementation of the college's climate action plan. She works across the campus with faculty, staff, and students to implement meaningful sustainability measures. She's currently engaged in implementing a campus-wide organics collection program, identifying incentives for the addition of more EV charging stations on campus, and initiating a decarbonization plan so that the college can come off of its reliance on fossil fuels. She's a proud mom of 3 kids for whom she seeks to build a regenerative future. So Ira, I'm going to hand it off to you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And to our team here as well, I extend my thank you, my gratitude. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. As Cami mentioned, I'm with Mount San Antonio College. We go by Mount SAC. We're located in Walnut, California, which is about 15-20 minutes without traffic from LA, southeast of LA. We are a very large community college. We're the largest in California. We're a single district, single campus. And so there's a lot of there are a lot of pros to that when it comes to a climate action plan. We're able to get a lot done. In fact, we started our CAP back in 2018. That was our very first one. And I wanted to kind of take you through that process very quickly because there are quite a few lessons learned in terms of how we wanted to approach, how to start writing this next version of the climate action plan that we're currently in. So the next slide, please. So in 2018, it was actually an external effort. We hired consultants to come in and basically analyze everything for us. As a matter of fact, I was that consultant. I was one of a team of consultants working for Mount SAC. So I was able to, I'm able to now really understand what the impacts are, what the pros and the cons are of working as a consultant, working from the outside in, and then now from the inside out. The next slide, please. In 2018, we actually combined that whole effort with the Educational Facilities Master Plan. And we had a variety of eco-shreds and workshops, which were great. The next slide. It helped us establish our areas of sustainability and also a goal or two for each of those areas of sustainability. And it was a very rich and very enriching experience, we think, for everybody involved. Next slide. But what we realized after completing it, and now there's been a bit of time, is that the plan has largely been this rather long, arduous document, like many plans tend to be. And while components of the plan are being implemented, and that is actually my position, my role now is to implement that climate action plan. There are many components of the plan that have not been implemented, and that's because of several reasons. And one of them might be the format that we chose. So this image here kind of depicts what that climate action plan might feel like to the audience members that we're really trying to reach. Next slide, please. And those are our students. So I just wanted to include this fun little slide because, if you can imagine if I or anybody else were to text one of our many, many students on campus, did you see Mount SAC's climate action plan? Pretty sure they would respond with TLDR, which is too long, didn't read. It's only about 250 pages long, right? I mean, who doesn't have time to read something that long? So I think that now we really are putting a lot more effort and a lot more time into understanding our audience. Next slide, please. And understanding how they communicate. Although they are perhaps a little too involved with their very many devices and platforms, they are also very connected. They're together all the time, connected in multiple ways and communicating across multiple platforms. Next slide, please. And understanding our audience also means understanding how busy they are. They are constantly, moving along from one class to the next. We are a community college. They commute to our school. We don't have housing on our campus. Many of them are coming from 28 miles outside of our area, and they have multiple jobs. They have multiple responsibilities. They have family responsibilities. They're juggling a lot. They don't have very much time. And our faculty our faculty is equally busy serving our students. They are very passionate and very committed, but they are also very stretched. And so we want to make sure that we really engage these two specific audience types in this next climate action plan, understanding how they communicate and how short they are on time. Next slide, please. And we also want to conduct this in an internal effort this time around. So really using that brain trust that is Mount SAC as opposed to relying on outside consultants, because we have such a solid brain trust here that we can really harvest and make sure that we celebrate in the next rendition of our climate action plan. Next slide, please. And so here's just a snapshot of some of the pros and cons that we've witnessed when we compare, the external effort versus the internal effort. So some of the pros of having an external effort conduct your climate action plan with you is that you have specialized knowledge, you have energy, you have transportation, you have greenhouse gas experts, and those are just a few, all pouring into your college, which is an amazing opportunity. You have also an objective perspective, which is gold. I mean, being able to analyze the ins and outs of your college without being too invested emotionally is absolutely important. And there's a lot of resource efficiency. Because they are being paid, they will become much more accountable to ensure that they're delivering. And that's a huge pro. The con is that they are being paid. So this can often be costly, especially in times such as these where budgets are very constrained. There's a lack of institutional knowledge, and there's a dependence that we begin to have, us as a college, on our consultants. So you have to be able to weigh the pros and cons of that. An internal effort, some of the pros are, again, that institutional knowledge, that brain trust. There's cost efficiency in that you don't have to pay a consultant necessarily. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily time efficiency, but there is some cost efficiency. And there's skill development. So there's a lot of training opportunity along the way for everybody involved in the internal effort. Cons are there is subjectivity, and that can often blur one's perspective. And so we have to be really aware of that. Resource constraints, again, we're all really, really stretched thin, especially our faculty and our students. And there's potential gaps in knowledge. We may not be as expert as we'd like to think in all of these areas, and consultants can often provide that potential gap. They can fill that potential gap. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our team of stakeholders this time around, as well as last time, but I think even more so this time around for the 2024 CAP. We are very cross-disciplinary. You can see just a long list of the various stakeholders that we have involved in this process. We now have a sustainability director, that is myself, and we have a sustainability coordinator on the faculty side, Professor Anders, and also Professor Greenberg. And so we work hand in hand almost every other day, which is wonderful. And then you can see, of course, faculty, students, our new president here at Mount SAC, and environmental senator, and our Eagle Club, which is our environmental club. Not to mention our Climate Commitment Environmental Justice Committee, which has a strong hand and responsibility in developing this CAP. Okay, and the next slide, please. Another quick mention I want to make is that this time around we have stipends for faculty and students. I think that's really important because there is a lot of time spent in the effort. Next slide, please. We have 13 focus groups. I'm just sharing one view of a focus group here. And each of the focus groups have various subject areas and experts. Next slide. This time around, we have 6 sustainability interns, which is wonderful, all paid, and they're really promoting and diving into this climate action plan effort. Next slide, please. And now, how do we actually come up with this format? So through all of the assembling and organizing of this climate action plan around, as you've just seen, we culminated all of that into a climate action workshop. and asked all of our stakeholders and members and participants to basically sketch out it, like a cartoon sketch of what they wanted the climate action to look like, the climate action plan to look like. Next slide, please. And so what we came up with was a much more user-friendly CAP that's very infographic heavy, because we know that we only have a small bandwidth of time that we need to capture and provide all the salient points of our climate action plan to our audience. So I just wanted to provide a couple of glimpses of that in this slide and in the next one, so that you can see this time around our approach is not as much focused on providing this very formal document as such, that could become a dissertation necessarily, but something that could really become much more palatable and digestible for our very busy audience. Next slide, please. And our intention is that there will be a very strong virtual presence, both on our website and on our social platforms when we present the final CAP, which is going to be completed at the end of this fall. Next slide, and I think that was my last one. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ira. We appreciate it. And for folks that might have specific questions for Ira, if you could drop them in the chat. I know we have some from the poll as well, which will be helpful when we get through all the presentations. So next we have Matt Williams, who serves as the director of the University of Florida's Office of Sustainability. Matt has worked in sustainability on Southeastern campuses for 18 years, with 11 of those in his current role at the University of Florida. He's proud to lead a talented and diverse team of sustainability professionals for the benefit of the UF campus and surrounding community. Matt's approach recognizes the combined roles of individuals and institutions in creating a sustainable future, and the need for higher education to take a leadership role in educating students for sustainability, researching sustainable solutions to global issues, and incorporating sustainability practices into day-to-day campus operations. Thanks, Matt, for being here, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Cami. Thanks to all of our participants, and thanks to my co-panelists as well. So University of Florida, we're a large Research One doctoral institution in the state of Florida. We are that blue dot in the north central portion of the state there on the map. We're one of the 2 land-grant universities, so we've got an extension program in all 67 counties. We also have a hospital, law school, a variety of those other aspects. We've got about 55,000 students, about 20,000 staff and faculty, and we have about $1 billion in annual research expenditures. Our main campus, which is the focus of our climate action plan, we've got about 23 million gross square feet and 680 buildings and 1,000 square acres. And we can get into it a little bit in the questions if anybody else is in a similar situation. We do focus on main campus, and we're looking at how we expand out to all of our other outlying areas and campuses and institutions as well. But right now we're focused on the main. Next slide, please. So our office, we're an operational sustainability office. I know that many of us are in different places of the university and coming from different backgrounds. We sit within facility services, which is part of business affairs. And our mission is a campus-wide mission, engaging all the way through faculty, students, research, education, and that extension staff system. And we've got 5 full-time staff on our team. That's an older picture. We've had new faces on the team, but that was the team that started our Climate Action Plan 2.0 process. I want to specifically call out, so Hannah in the black dress and Fiona in the white shirt and red pants. Those were our sort of 2 key co-facilitators and coordinators on the Climate Action Plan. Corey in the purple shirt is our sustainability engineer and did a lot of the background calculations. And then Liz Storn is not pictured. She is our Vermont portion of the University of Florida campus up until recently when she left to start her own sustainability consulting group. Next slide. So University of Florida has a long history of climate action planning. It was one of the 12 inaugural universities to sign the American College of Presidents Climate Commitment. And the first climate action plan was done in 2009. And like many campuses, probably around that time period, it was done by a core group of about 6 people on the campus. It predated everybody who's on my current team. And we did have some good successes that came out of that. We were able to achieve most of the goals that were set out in there, including an 18% reduction in greenhouse gases per square foot. because at the time they didn't recognize that we would have multiple millions of square feet in additional building space built over that time as well. We were able to host a community resilience building workshop based on the model that Second Nature does in 2019. And then we started some climate action listening sessions in 2020 to see where our campus was, what our community was interested in, and then started this process in 2021 and carried it through to 2022. And we'll talk about where it is now. Next slide. Unlike ERA, so where she's got a large commuter base, we have a large residential base on our campus. So if you look at our emissions, the vast majority is in the energy and the buildings areas as well. And we know that that makes a difference in terms of your climate action planning and where your foci are. It's always fascinating to us. The faculty will always say, well, if only those students would all bicycle to campus, we'd be fine. But it's, it's actually our faculty, staff, employee transportation, and our business transportation that is our largest transportation sector. Next slide. So that led us to figure out what areas we wanted to focus on. And we were very, very specific about a plan that really targeted the emissions, direct emissions that the university emits, and that we were targeted on those metrics in particular. So we came up with, it was 6 working groups, 5 areas. We had separate groups for buildings and then for energy. Then we also did offsets and finance because we had and currently do have a 2025 carbon neutrality goal for our campus. But we know that finance is going to be the tricky part of all of it. Then we had an academics group and a resilience group as well, because like many of our states, Florida is already seeing a lot of the impacts of climate change, including here on our own campus. Next. So as we were as a team coming up with, okay, we're going to do this, we need to do a 2.0 plan. And we, like many campuses, as you're starting to think about this, we're trying to decide, do we want help? Do we need help? We know that we are blessed to have a large team compared to many campuses with 5 full-time staff in different roles. But is there an area where we would want help with this? If we were to do either with or without somebody from external, how can we use this to build our own skills and our own capacity as a team as well? And then Ira mentioned this one as well. How do we stay connected enough to implement this one? Because we've definitely seen other plans on our campus from other parts of other units where the consultant team came in, they did a great job of engaging stakeholders, they did a great job of communicating with them, but the core team that's actually going to implement that was actually a little bit separated. And they hadn't thought through how they wanted to do that. And then for us, what is our final product? We talk about writing a climate action plan. And to Ira's point, to echo that one as well, UF's first one was 32 pages long, but it was still very dense 32 pages. We know that there are other campuses that had 100-page climate action plans early on as well. So moving into the next slide. So we recognize that based on what skills we had internally, and that we knew that we didn't want to write a huge document plan. We wanted to put all of our time and attention into facilitation, into the output and the actions. And so we decided to build on facilitation training that we had already started as a team, recognizing the importance of that on any campus, but on our campus, which is sort of decentralized, with a lot of players that have a lot of either responsibility or opinions about how things should get done. One of the other key components of it was that we wanted to make sure that we were able to be part of the conversations, because when we were talking to different parts of the campus, we recognized that there were points where our team had the larger picture view, and we didn't want to be in that position where we were trying to facilitate and then breaking that role as a facilitator to jump into the conversation to make a point or to make an amendment or a credit to some other aspect of it. And then we knew going into it that we had tricky topics and tricky groups. With energy and buildings, there is a long history of good, positive movement on UF's campus, but we also know that, for the last decade, these 2 individuals that are both core key responsible have fought with each other tooth and nail. And that's one of the reasons why we weren't able to get it through. So we were looking for somebody to be able to help us facilitate through that process. And then we were looking for some structure and strategy that was used with other campuses. We didn't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel, and we knew that we didn't want to follow the process that had been used before. We wanted something slightly different. Next. So we selected, we had already done through the ASHE workshops, that were part of Greener U was doing at the time. So Dallas Scott had been with Greener U. She now has her own consulting business, Trust. And so we had many of our team do the Facilitation 1 and Facilitation 2 trainings with her. And so we talked to her about what would it look like to have a facilitation and strategy coach for our climate action plan. And I will mention that she's still doing facilitation training. And so there's a new online course. It is very reasonably priced, and that QR code will take you to it. And can't recommend it enough. But it was one thing where we recognized that even though we'd had the training, we also still felt like there was much, much more that our team could learn from that one as well. Next step. So we developed this structure where we have the working groups in the center of our 6 different areas. We had the support and planning team, which was our office in conjunction with Dallas as a consultant. We had working group liaisons, which were somebody that was in that working group that is ultimately sort of responsible for that area, because we were really interested in making sure that it wasn't only on our office to own these actions and these goals and these strategies. We had an advisory board of mid to upper level administrators so that we were getting approval through the process, so there were no surprises. And then we had the UF community. We were really pleased that we had over 100 participants in those working groups that were through all of them, more than 30 different facilitated meetings. And our 3 community listening sessions, we had hundreds of people who were involved in those as well. Next step. So when we did talk about our final deliverables and structure, we wanted to focus on those actions, the outcomes, and the implementation. Early on in the first climate action plan that I was part of, we wanted to make the case for why climate, why now, why here. In this one, we figured we don't need to be doing that. We really want to focus on what's the thing that we're going to do in the next 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. Our internal team was already focused on digital and concise summary documents. And so we really have looked at, rather than writing a climate action plan, a website and a series of dashboards that we'll talk about here in just a second. And we really wanted to generate consensus, ownership, and show the progress in there as well. So we purposefully invited people that we knew were at odds with one another into those working groups, recognizing that we had strong facilitation to be able to work through that in the end. Next. And so we focused ours into 3 impact areas, 5 categories, and we worked with visions, goals, and strategies over the course of a year in those meetings. We came up with 5 separate visions for each one of those areas about what the university would look like, 15 goals in those areas, 44 strategies, and then over 300 actions that were sort of immediate next step actions that identified who, what responsibility, what resources, and moving it forward. Next step. And this is sort of briefly what it sort of looked like, still very word heavy, but at the same time, our summary document that we provided to the administration was only about 6 pages long. And that's the document that we have been using as our climate action plan so far. Next. And very briefly, I'll mention that we are still pending approval of that. So we completed it in 2022, and we can kind of get into this. I'm sure many people are in the same place with administrative changes, with political changes on our campuses and in our states. But we are still moving forward. And because we had those action areas, a lot of those are moving forward, whether they're part of a climate action plan or not. Because when we got to the end of it, people who were originally perhaps hesitant or uncertain were in a place where they said, no, this is my area, this is my thing to be doing, and it's the right thing to be doing. So I'll leave it there and wait for the questions for the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Just real quick before I move on to Jen, somebody had asked if you could put that facilitation training in the chat. I think you're able to chat everyone.
Yep, can do.
Okay, so we'll transition now to Jen, who is our last panelist. Jen Huck has nearly 30 years of professional experience in the nonprofit and public sectors. Jen leads Greener U's planning team, which performs climate baselining, benchmarking, greenhouse gas emissions inventorying, climate action planning, and communications for higher education and other clients. Jen's background includes working for a U.S. congressman, grassroots advocacy, media relations, and communications. She has a master's in public administrations from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and a master's in design in design studies from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. For fun, she earned a graduate certificate in forensic genetic genealogy from the University of New Haven during the pandemic. I don't know if I could have done that, but props to you, Jen, doing that.
Thank you. 100% irrelevant. Thank you so much. And I'm really honored to be here. And I'm really impressed with my colleagues here. So thank you. It's just it's a pleasure to be being a panelist with you guys. As Cami mentioned, I work for Greener U. And as Matt mentioned, Dallas is a former Greener Uer. So I'm kind of a protege of Dallas. I started at Greener U about 7 years ago and worked very closely with Dallas. So, and I can totally vouch for her trainings. They're fantastic. I learned a lot from them myself. So kudos to Dallas. Really quickly, Greener U is a firm and we're based in Massachusetts, but this planning team can work with anybody across the country and actually in Canada too. I've had a couple of Canada clients. We have a vision and a mission statement, which is a little bit unusual for a private business, but we basically help institutions navigate the organizational, operational, and infrastructure changes required to reach climate neutrality. And we do that through our planning team, which is what I work with. And then we have kind of a transition to our engineering department, who help develop decarbonization plans and energy efficiency measures. And then we have an implementation side. So basically, we're a construction firm. Just to give you a little background, I mean, I know that we're coming at this from a little bit of a different perspective since we're not a college or university presenting. So I want to kind of give a generic overview of what the consultant perspective looks like in terms of what we offer. We always start with baselining for any kind of climate action planning process. That is going to include the normal stuff, which is greenhouse gas emissions accounting, STARS reporting. We can help with any level of support on that. We also review other plans that are part of the institution. So I think Matt had mentioned that several years ago. University of Florida had expanded their campus square footage by quite a bit. And so what we always try to do is review plans that might influence the setting of climate action goals. We also take a look at local and regional and state priorities to see if there's alignment there, which is especially relevant when it comes to public institutions. And then sometimes we do a resilience assessment if that's required or interest, if it's of interest. And then we might do a building decarbonization assessment. So again, we've got our engineering team that can come out and take a look at specific buildings on campus and look for decarbonization opportunities there. We do offer similar training. I think when we lost Dallas, we lost like major training firepower, but like I said, we've got the materials to do it. So one of the reasons that I emphasize this is like Matt and like Ira, we do want to empower those on campus to be able to continue the practices that we leave them with, so that when they've gone through this process, they can continue project management skill sets and meeting facilitation skill sets and managing kind of difficult situations or places where you get stuck, because you certainly don't want that to happen. With community input, I think this is a major part of the planning process. So the planning process always has to include stakeholder engagement. This is a major thing that we work on. We recognize that not everybody has the time or the inclination to participate in the entire process, but we try to map out points along the way where you've got, places where you can weigh in or react to something or react to goals that are being developed. And probably the most important part about this, and I think this is going to come up later in some of our Q&A, but it's like, when do you engage leadership? Leadership is tricky to engage because they have no time. And they have a million other priorities, but if you don't figure out how to engage leadership along the way, they may not be in favor of what you come up with in the end. So this is something that we really strategically map out from the get-go. We also like to have focus area working groups, just like Ira mentioned, not quite so many, because I think we try to keep it down to maybe 3 or 4 And those groups will create maybe 3 or 4 goals each. Just recognizing that I think the fewer goals you have, the more memorable they tend to be. And those goals they might be more ambitious and they've got more teeth, but then you can develop strategies that can be kind of flexible along the way. Something that has also been mentioned is that we will do the plan design, and I think there's a difference. We'll do 2 plans actually. So I'll emphasize that, like, yes, it is incredibly important to have a plan that is visually beautiful, that is memorable. It's got infographics, it's got like the school's branding. But and then again, like probably like a 1-pager that actually just lists all of your goals and strategies, 1 or 2 pagers. But on the back end, then you need to develop kind of a work plan that actually has tasks and assignments. And it's even better if some of that work plan can be like built into people's job descriptions so that they can actually be accountable for that work in the long run, and it doesn't get lost or like gather dust on a shelf. And then the last thing I'll mention is that the plan approval process is incredibly important and probably gets forgotten about because we think like, okay, we have finished the draft, we have a beautiful written plan, designed plan, and then, oh, it's not approved yet by the college the college administration. And then sometimes that can take months or years for a variety of reasons. It could be that another institutional emergency has come up, or enrollment is down, or just something has changed, or the college president has stepped down, or there's a major scandal, hopefully not, but yeah, anything can happen. So Matt is raising his hand. So all of that can get in the way. So I'm going to just give you a few perspectives on the pros and really the one con I came up with. I know that there are more, and Ira pointed them out earlier. But there are lots of, from my perspective, there are lots of pros in working with a consultant only perspective. One of which is that we're going to manage this project for you from start to finish. And you don't have a lot of internal bandwidth to like manage lots and lots and lots of people's tasks. It's really helpful to just like give that to somebody else to do. Another is that we can provide information about, other institutions and their benchmarking. That's something that we always try to come up with peer institutions, just because I think you are probably all aware that the college administrations and presidents really like to see what their peers are doing, their colleagues are doing, and then try to best them. So another is that, and this has been mentioned, is like our participation means that it enables you to participate fully in this process, and that you don't have to think about managing the project and participating at the same time. So Matt kind of mentioned that is like, which hat are you wearing in the same meeting? Sometimes it's nice to just like, all right, somebody else is taking care of all the logistics. We can just participate fully, free up the brain space to do that. The fourth, which has also been mentioned, is that we can bring in some, outside perspective on subject matter expertise. And then we bring a whole wealth of engagement methods and, tools to get people to participate in different ways. I have 5 more pros on my next slide to share with you. Again, offering a neutral perspective, which does not mean that we don't smile, because we do. We will facilitate your meetings for you, or as I mentioned in the training process, we can train you to do that too. But again, I think it's nice to have somebody else who can take on that role, because it's more than just creating a meeting agenda. It's like really kind of instituting a culture of good facilitation across the institution. This is debatable. I mean, yes, we'll draw on institutional knowledge. I think we recognize we don't know the ins and outs of your institution, and we might use that to our advantage in the sense that we're going to play dumb and say, please explain to me why things are the way they are. And then we might challenge, why are the things the way they are? And is it an opportunity to blow it up? We also have facilities expertise, as I mentioned. So, this is something that is also helpful to have, is some engineering and some construction that might be able to come in. And then finally, we offer you emotional support, because I think there's always going to be a groan zone, and people are going to get frustrated and upset. And it's a good idea to, be able to draw on somebody who can give you a virtual hug. So the biggest con that I see is that it does cost money to work with an outside perspective. But aside from that, I'll leave it to the rest of you to debate. Really quickly, and I know my time is getting coming up here, but we worked with, this is sort of a hybrid process, or more of an abbreviated process. We worked with an elementary school in Washington, D.C., and instead of creating a full vetted climate action plan, we did a 3-hour afternoon workshop, because that was what they could afford to do. We had about 25 participants. They were administration, teachers, and parents. And then we vetted and voted on a set of 5 goals in 3 different focus areas. I could go down a list of pros and cons of that. I guess I'm not sure where they are in implementation, because we kind of left it at, here's your goal language. We're all set there. But I think it being such a short process, it may have gotten forgotten about. And then quickly, really quickly, lessons learned. This process can take a long time. So we've tried to work with institutions that want to get this done in 6 months. It can be done, but it's really hard. And the more people you have involved, the harder it is to schedule everybody's time. Within every process is a groan zone. There's always going to be a point when it's super frustrating. There's also lots of group editing, and that's like a groan zone in and of itself. And then sometimes you have people internally who will not pay attention to their colleagues, but they will pay attention to the consultant who comes in and gives advice. So for whatever reason, you could be saying the exact same thing as somebody internally, and the administration somehow listens. So I think that is all I have for you.
Thanks so much, Jen. So I want to shift to questions. We have a little bit over 10 minutes, and we wanted to be sure that we had time for questions. And so what I want to start with is just the questions that folks put in the poll. And then we'll move on to the questions that are in the live chat. If people have other ones, feel free to put them in there. So one of the ones that is really broad, but I think is a really good question, is just how to get started. What do I do? If I am a person of one, I'm not sure, what their sustainability office looks like. How do they, if they are on square zero, how do they get to square one? So I don't know who wants to take that one, but that is one of the questions. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. So even though we're not an office of one, when I came on board, the second climate action plan was supposed to have been completed a year before me. And there were a whole bunch of reasons why we figured out we wanted to delay all the way to 2019 on doing it. Honestly, it really is just get it started. And that's one of the things that, again, is difficult, is knowing where to start. I would say that knowing your emissions, you probably will come up with 90% of what the actual outcomes of your climate action plan would be in your own mind. And then thinking about how you are able to get some sort of feedback, input, and consensus from other people as well. But I'll sort of leave it at that.
Anything to add?
Share very quickly. So, I came on as an employee at Mount SAC as opposed to a consultant during COVID back in 2020. But the effort for climate action planning started long before I did. And I think at many campuses, there are several champions or a champion. In our case, we had, of course, our amazing faculty, our professors. They directly approached our then President Scroggins, and started having conversations with him. It took a while, but eventually they all came to the consensus that they wanted to sign on with Second Nature. And that started getting the conversations going. So it started with that small conversation and started to bloom into something greater. They got a climate commitment environmental justice committee together that now reports directly to the president's advisory committee, which the president, of course, is a part of. And because of that commitment, because of that direct line of communication, so many other things began to fall into place. So I think having those champions, figuring out who they are and asking them to engage and begin those discussions is key. Secondly, because you don't know where you are, what you can do yet, that research that Matt's kind of talking about, understanding where you are, is key. Also talking to your peers. So essentially conducting interviews and understanding how other institutions have done it will help you a lot. And that's, I think, been very good for us as well.
Yeah, I want to add on to that. Most institutions have a list of peers that they look at themselves of being either equal to or aspiring peers. So if you could find that list and maybe reach out to those folks, that would be really great too. So another question from the poll, and then we'll go to the live questions. This one is really broad, but I think it's a good one, and it came up a couple times, but best way to procure projects, how to fund the projects that have massive implications for the campus. And just an FYI, we will have a webinar as part of the series that will be partially focused on this, on embedding implementation and financing. But maybe for folks here that have done it directly, or have seen, Jen, maybe you have seen specific campuses, how they have built that in, that would be helpful for folks to know.
I have not seen that built in necessarily, but I will say that there are different pots of money for different projects. So it's important to remember that too.
Yeah, I guess I'll add into there. That was one of the reasons we specifically had the finance and offsets group. And so one of the things that we were doing was, as ideas were coming up in the buildings and energy group, we were feeding them into the finance group to say, okay, here's what's coming. Now, what are the ways that we do this? And we knew that we've always, like any university, had arguments about which pot should pay for what. And some of the things fall between the pots of money. So we were purposeful in that finance group to try to get people talking about, we do all agree that this is the right way to go, and it's always been that financial hurdle. So how do we come up with it? And we definitely did not solve it all. No question, we didn't solve it, but we were amazed at the number of things, especially where you had somebody that was responsible for it. After meeting 2 or 3, they're like, let me take a look at the flexibility I've got in my budget and see where this may fit or not fit. So again, it was about the individuals that were there, part of it, and they started coming up with some solutions to their own.
I could share a quick insight as well, and that is with the first climate action plan and the second one, they've been integrated into, or they are parallel to the effort known as the Educational Facilities Master Plan back in 2018. That's what we called it. We now call it the Educational Facilities Comprehensive Plan. But basically that assesses that our entire campus, and looks at capacity within all of our buildings, for example, looks at the curriculum. It's very, very, it's very integrated. But what's great about that is if, for example, through that process, we see that we need to, for example, expand our central plant or bring on renewable energy and connect that with workforce development and with our curriculum, we're able to do that. And then we can synergize potential funding.
Thanks, Ira. Yeah, I know that is, it feels like that is the crux of how to ultimately fund the CAP. And that's what a lot of people, or the climate action plan, that people are coming up against, but trying to embed it in as many other processes as possible sounds like a potential solution as well. Okay, so this question is from Mike Lazat, and he asks, if we have a dominant emission source for which a small number of people are responsible and knowledgeable, like buildings, do you see a problem with writing that part of a climate action plan first? We could cover smaller, controversial, or everybody's business sources later. I feel like I could get a CAP for buildings done and approved quickly, but the comprehensive CAP will drag out.
Yeah, I don't see any reason in acting sooner. As long as you engage those people who are the ones allegedly responsible for that large amount of emissions. Just make sure that they're part of that solution.
I agree with that one. I could totally see doing it separately. We did find that it was nice having them going simultaneously, because in ways each group would come up with something in somebody else's group invariably. That's the way humans function. But we were able to use that to our advantage and say, okay, in buildings, this seems really onerous to you. In transportation, they're actually looking at how do we get increased bike ridership or increased transit ridership, and they go, oh, well, if they're able to tackle that, then we should be able to tackle this harder issue in our area too. So there was some benefit to showing them where there were successes in areas they might have seen as being onerous in another area that encouraged them.
And I'll just add, if it is buildings that you anticipate being the biggest contributor to your carbon footprint, I think showing that data is of the utmost importance. So doing like an ASHRAE level 2 audit of all the buildings would give you that baseline that you need. And then if you have an EMS, like an energy management system, you'll be able to monitor it. So I think, getting that data is essential.
Okay, our next question is from Mike Cap, and he says, I assume the biggest carbon emissions component to every organization is buildings. Has anyone made significant progress in building or renovating buildings to net zero energy?
So I'll just quickly start. We have not yet achieved net zero in any of our existing stock of buildings, but we have established a net zero energy policy for all future buildings. So we have a few coming online in the next couple of years. We'll hopefully be pursuing a bond, which will fund additional facilities, and so those will have to achieve net zero. So getting that policy in place in and of itself is, for us, an achievement, because we had to get the approval of multiple stakeholders to do that. It helps that we're in California, but nonetheless, it's important to at least get that in place so that you can lay that foundation for future work.
And I'm just going to ask these two other questions, and then Matt, you can add on to this just so folks have to leave like right at 2, and then we can finish these out. So did you consider combining your climate action plan with a sustainability plan from Rob? And then can you communicate a little bit more about the effectiveness of your advisory groups, how you chose who was on them, and what values they added to the process? All big questions. We have 2 minutes, but we'll just open the floor.
I'll go ahead and jump in with Rob. We had talked about it, and then we purposefully decided to separate the two out. So do a climate action plan and then do a sustainability plan off as a next phase. And it worked out really nicely for us because, I don't make any excuses that I would be super happy if I never had to discuss recycling again in my life. And so like all the recycling and waste conversations that popped up, we were able to say, we're going to put that in the bike rack. And that's for the sustainability plan, because we were really focused on emissions sources, and it allowed us to really streamline the process. We know, and we learned a lot that would help us for the way we're going to do a sustainability plan as well. So we were purposeful about separating the two.
Yeah, in my experience, more often than not, they are combined. There's usually sustainability and climate action plan, or SCAP is sometimes what they're called. And because so many sustainability initiatives do affect emissions, including waste and recycling, they all kind of fit together in some way. But I think it is kind of important to establish whether or not your institution wants to take on Scope 3 emissions as part of your climate action plan. And there's sort of a spectrum of what a climate action plan could look like or does look like. But in my experience, it's almost always inclusive of sustainability too. I forgot what the other question was. Could you repeat that, Cami?
The advisory groups.
The advisory groups. Yeah, I think that's an important one. We're at 2 o'clock, but maybe real quick if somebody wants to take that, because I do think that's an important question. And I can reread it if that's helpful.
Yeah.
But can you communicate a little bit more about the effectiveness of your advisory groups, how you chose who was on them and what value they added to the process? So I think how you chose who was on them is probably an important question there.
I'll go ahead and jump in quickly. So we were very purposeful about it, and we selected sort of a AVP level was what we were targeting in there. We wanted somebody with decision-making and financial control. Some of them were over some of the other areas that we were working in. And some of them were chosen because of who they were sort of politically within the structure and the culture of the university, knowing that we could rely on them to be socializing some of these points as we moved it along, so that, again, we weren't surprising any other administrators as we got to the final section of it. It worked pretty well, although that's a busy group and it was very difficult to get them to review materials and have a lot of really in-depth thought or response to it.
I'll add quickly, luckily we had already established the Climate Commitment Environmental Justice Committee. And that's a very broad group across our entire campus. It includes faculty, specifically the Academic Senate President, and also it includes folks from facilities, and it includes people from the administration, and of course includes our students. So that group then put together a list of the stakeholders that would be involved in the climate action plan. And then that was passed through several conversations, including with the president, to discuss how it could be fine-tuned. And so that resulted in the 13 focus groups that we have. But each of those focus groups tackles a very specific subject, and it's very interdisciplinary.
One last thing I would add, and I agree with everything Ira and Matt just said. One thing we've done before is invite like a sustainability executive from a different institution to participate in that advisory group, just as like a peer institution, because sometimes that person has a very interesting perspective that they can lend, and there's a little bit of like brandishing, I guess.
That's a great idea. All right, that hour went by so quickly, as it usually does. So thank you all, Jen, Matt, and Ira, for being here. And if folks could fill out the evaluation form, that would be really helpful. And just let me know if you have any questions, and everybody's contact information was on the slides. And thank you again. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.